Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have a very interesting subject that is focused around the neuroscience and psychology behind desire, and focusing in particular on women over 40, because it happens to be an era in which desire can change, and it can be helpful and useful to have a little bit deeper understanding of how it works and some of the tools that we may have at our disposal. So topics like these, I always like to be extra careful to make sure that I say that there is no one size fits all where everything is the same for every person across the board. And in no way does anything ever speak for all people. But I think it's helpful to still have the conversation and to take it apart a little bit from the understanding of there being different forms of desire that evolve and change throughout a person's life. So one of the things that can shift is the type of desire. So one type of desire is known as spontaneous desire, where it just kind of shows up. For many people, spontaneous desire is rather prevalent when you're young and when your hormones are kind of at their peak. This is the type of desire that just shows up. It's sort of always there in the background. You might be doing something completely ordinary and something will trigger a thought or a memory. And it's a little bit easier to access that when your hormones are at their peak. But another form of desire is known as responsive desire, and it starts more so in the brain. And it can come about through a little bit more deliberate, intentional trying to get it stirred up, where spontaneous desire can happen, sitting in the middle of doing something else. Responsive desire comes from a specific stimulus that's more intentional. A thought, a story, an interaction, trying to specifically conjure a particular type of mood. Each of these different forms of desire run on different circuitry in our brain. So spontaneous desire can lean more heavily on lower drive-based brain systems that are connected to hormones like estrogen and testosterone, whereas responsive desire is more of the cognitive layer, where the prefrontal cortex is assessing context, the insula is processing bodily sensation and meaning. And those dynamics working together can help to generate arousal from a specific intentional thought, thinking about a scene, thinking about an interaction, thinking about an idea, rather than there being this hormone trigger that's sort of firing on its own. And so one of the things that shifts as estrogen shifts with age, the hormone-driven spontaneous system gets a little bit quieter, or it can get quieter, and the more cognitive, context-driven system may be able to be tapped into. So it isn't necessarily that desire goes away, it's that it changes, and it's not necessarily as easy to tap into it. So the responsive type that may have been more in the background in the past can become more of the primary way for it to show up. And it can be actively engaged with on purpose, using inputs. And there's a variety of different forms of input, and so I'm not here to talk exhaustively about those because there are many other experts who would do a better job with that anyway. But one of the inputs that allows for us to more intentionally, deliberately create responsive desire is a story. And I think that humans in general respond to story strongly, and women in particular respond to story when it comes to topics around desire. And that can show up, of course, in a number of ways. And here's one of the interesting pieces. One of the neurochemicals we have that we frequently associate with pleasure, which is dopamine, is not specifically a pleasure chemical. It is a desire chemical. It is a wanting chemical. It is an anticipation chemical. And it doesn't fire the biggest at receiving the reward itself, but rather at the anticipation of a reward, particularly an uncertain reward. So dopamine neurons ramp up during buildup, and they actually spike the hardest right before the payoff, more so than they ever would for a guaranteed outcome. And so things like pining and almosts and slow burn and tension building can often trigger that dopamine response much more strongly than something that is guaranteed or sure thing. And this is one of many reasons reasons why removing pressure and expectation can be particularly helpful for women. Purely speaking about dopamine, predictability flattens desire, whereas uncertainty, novelty, and anticipation increase it. So a slow burn story is essentially this extended anticipation exercise for your brain. And the tension itself, the desire, the wanting, the not quite getting it yet, the racing heart, the heightened alertness, the wondering, is it going to happen now? Oh, not quite. Okay, maybe next time. Is this the moment? All of that adds fuel to that fire. And in the story with characters, it can be a flirtatious exchange, and every non-romantic scene where they're near each other but not acting on that desire is further intensifying that state of wanting rather than just instantly resolving it. And then we have another system operating, the norepinephrine and the amygdala, ramping up general arousal and general alertness, because the brain doesn't fully separate out this is intense from this is attraction, and they both read as overlapping arousal circuitry. That intensity of the story can read as chemistry, whatever's causing it. And here's yet another interesting layer that we uncover as we dig a little bit deeper into this concept of desire in the form of story. Not only is it necessarily about this primary character wanting this other partner, it's also equally and perhaps even more strongly about being desired. So wanting to be wanted, to be desired by that party that you're interested in is often very central to ways in which women experience desire, and maybe less focused around wanting that partner specifically. While that would be present, and there's obviously an interest in that other person, their desire for the main character is often an even greater source of experiencing that novelty and pleasure, being the object of desire, making the woman feel beautiful and desirable and wanted. And then another layer on top of that is being desired by someone whose interest was a little bit hard to earn. And that is often showing up really frequently as a trigger for female desire in many stories. So it is someone that they're interested in. So we're talking about consensual, mutual interest. And when that other party is maybe just a little bit more challenging to achieve that interest back, when they do desire her, it's a trigger. And there's another element here where that feeling of being desired is running through self-referential processing in the medial prefrontal cortex, the region that handles information about your value and your social standing. When that self-focused circuitry gets activated alongside the reward system that we talked about with the dopamine, the payoff goes beyond just this outside person is appealing and becomes I am the thing that's appealing, which is even more potent. So it's like a double hit now to the dopamine reward pathway. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why we see a lot of tropes in stories, in romantasy, where in a heterosexual relationship, the man that the woman is interested in is in some way a little bit out of reach, unattainable. There are many popular tropes of like professors and coworkers and all sorts of situations where there's a risk of some kind in the storyline. And I think the part that's important to understand is that it's not necessarily that women are drawn to unattainable people so much as it is that validation that comes from someone who had something to lose by getting involved with her is demonstrating her value by taking that risk in order to be with her, to get involved with her. And it's a psychological pattern. So I think it's important to notate this, because if people are drawn to particular tropes, they're still reading fiction. And it's important to note that that isn't necessarily something that they want in their real life. It just means that it stimulates desire in a specific way, and there's a reason for that. There are neuroscientific and psychological reasons why that desire pathway gets activated by those specific tropes. So when people are chasing after stories of even some of the darker romance, it's not necessarily that they're seeking that in the real world. It's that it's activating a very specific dopamine reward system pathway of an unpredictable reward. It's a variable reward pattern or an intermittent reward pattern, which is the same reinforcement structure that we see in things like slot machines and even social media, where there's unpredictable positive outcome of some kind, like even unpredictable praise, which draws in the character or the person more so than predictability does. And it spikes dopamine as well. So I think it's important to make a distinction between the fiction and what it's doing for the person reading it, and real life healthy interactions and relationships that may benefit from this woman activating those pathways, because the healthy, stable, reliable, wonderful partner benefits from her learning how to activate her own desire. And she can activate this reward pathway on her own terms with no real world cost, and then choose where to redirect it. It's kind of like a self-contained desire generator that she gets to be in charge of who benefits from. And so we can use fiction, we can use a variety of different types of stories to activate that responsive desire in a way that lets the brain specifically strengthen the neural pathways of that context, that type of thinking, that type of thought process. Because many women find it doesn't come automatically anymore. It doesn't happen automatically for them. That spontaneous desire takes a little bit of a dip. And so what they're working to do is to figure out new ways to specifically stimulate responsive desire. And fiction and storytelling is just one of those ways where you can almost be prescribed to read an erotic novel, because the mechanism is teaching the brain to think in these ways deliberately and intentionally, to focus on that type of content that arouses desire. And it's almost like a practice. The more you practice thinking about something, the easier it is to conjure thoughts around that topic. And it goes even beyond desire as well, where engaging with story and engaging with world building and fantasy in this type of way can actually help to reduce stress, to lower cortisol, and give your brain the nice, safe, low-stakes space in which to process a story like this. And as important as it is to find some of these tools and to find ways of stimulating one's own desire in order to continue to have whatever form of healthy or happy relationships one's interested in, I think it's also equally important to maintain the fictional content for what it is, to understand that it's not looking to mirror that content, nor to replace real people and real relationships that have flaws with so-called book boyfriends who sort of do everything perfectly, or at least do everything in a perfect way that stimulates that desire, whereas in real life, real relationships can't be evaluated against that backdrop. It's a tool, and its intention is to better understand how one's own desire pathways work, to better understand one's own desire triggers, so that you can utilize those new thought pathways in order to have a more satisfying, fulfilling life in some way, whatever that looks like. One of the things that happened for me several years ago is I began writing fiction again. Now, I've written fiction most of my life, since I was 5 years old. But this started because I was actually having migraines where I couldn't do anything on a device. I couldn't be on a computer or even a cell phone. And so I pulled out old notebooks and started handwriting stories. And this is what came out of my pen. So I wanted to share it with you. Among the many different mindset tools that I offer as a hypnotherapist, as a mindset coach, you're probably already familiar with my Hypno-Pothecary, the Poth, that has a variety of hypnosis audios that help you to change your thought patterns and your thinking and your beliefs. Now adding to that repertoire are a handful of very short fiction in some of the tropes that we talked about today. But one of the interesting things that I noticed was that getting my own brain to think in this way as I was writing and experiencing what were most definitely hormonal migraines, sometimes my migraine would abate even a little in activating some of these neural pathways around desire. And there is actually some neuroscience around that where women's estrogen levels can rise purely from being exposed to arousing content, just that mental state of arousal itself. And since the migraines were hormonal, I've often wondered if writing my way into that mental pathway around these topics in this context was giving me just even a little bit of a bump of a hormonal nudge as well. And of course, by no means am I making any claims that this is how to treat a migraine. Instead, I'm sharing a personal experience that I had that to me represents part of the benefit of learning how to tap into one's own desire mechanisms, learning how to build one's own neural pathways for this topic, and learning how to do it intentionally and on purpose. Long story short, pun fully intended, I now offer a handful of romanticy very short stories. And I do mean they are very short stories. And I'll share the link in the show notes in case you're interested in checking it out. And as always, if you're interested in hypnosis and my other mindset tools, those pieces are also available in the show notes for you. I hope you found this to be interesting. And until the next time we connect, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at RavenMosaic.com.